Mary of Magdala, AKA Mary Magdalene. She was not a prostitute. She was not a woman caught in adultery. And she was not the woman who anointed Jesus with oil over his hair or his feet, depending on which gospel you read. No, all of that was a confusion, maybe intentionally, maybe by accident, propagated by Pope Gregory the Great back in the 6th century. And so we're going to clear up her identity, and that's what we're talking about this week.
Kindred UMC live show features adults discussing adult topics, occasionally with adult language. It may not be suitable for young viewers. Please use discretion before watching.
Hello all. Welcome once again to the Kindred UMC pre-recorded live show, coming to you not live but pre-recorded from my front room, aka Kindred Studio A. My name is Chris Hayden. I am the pastor of Kindred UMC.
My name is Ann and I'm the treasurer for Kindred UMC.
My name is Adam and I just kind of walked in here.
We've never met Adam before. He may look familiar, but you're only imagining things.
This is a new Adam?
What do they call
this
that?
This is a different Adam.
Freudian. What's I forget the word of like the thing, like the full Fruit of the Loom shirt thing, where like people thought that there was a cornucopia, but there actually wasn't. But there actually was. Cornucopia is real on the Fruit of the Loom shirts.
Well, I know what a cornucopia is, but I don't know what you are talking about.
It's when like people believe in something that they thought existed, but actually in reality never existed.
I do. I don't know the term, but I do know. Yeah,
get in the comments.
Yeah, get in the comments.
Whatever that term is.
When you're convinced that something is true, and like everyone is
convinced that it's true,
convinced that
but it's really not true.
It's not true. Yeah, I know it.
Yeah,
I recognize the reference, but I can't pull it.
That sounds like conspiracy theory.
It's not. I swear. It's
no. It's kind of the
literally
opposite.
It's like a mass hysteria belief.
But we distract ourselves.
We do.
We are continuing our Barbies in the Bible series. And last week, if everything goes kind of according to plan, it may be last week, it may be the week before. I don't know. We've changed up the schedule to address current events. But we talked about Mary of Bethany. And this week, we're going to talk about Mary of Magdala, Mary Magdalene. So let me start by reading, I think, the most important scriptures. And I already said to you, and I'll say it to you and to you. The text we're going to read is one of the two most important texts for me personally. The first is the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well. That's the closest I get to a life verse for me. This one is also an equally, I think, powerful, riveting, important text. And I also have spent the whole day in prayer and soul care, so I'm a little tender. So I'm almost certainly going to tear up when I read this. So we're just going to have to deal with that. That's the reality of you're dealing with a sensitive modern man. That's the way it is. So this is from the Gospel of John. It is right at the end, chapter 20, verses 11 through 18. This is the text where Jesus has been crucified, he has been buried, and because he died on a Friday, and the Jewish Sabbath at that time is Saturday, and that's holy, and you are not allowed to do any work on Saturday. So all of the disciples, Mary, by the way, is one of the disciples. She's not one of the 12 listed, but she is a follower of Jesus. She studies at his feet. Mary Magdalene, as well as several other women, are disciples. And she is, along with another Mary, along with Martha, not her sister, but we're going to deal with that confusion. That's part of it. There's a lot of confusion around the Marys because there's 3 important Marys. So Mary and Martha go to clean Jesus's body because they weren't allowed to on Saturday. So this is kind of like the embalming process. This is the ancient version of embalming. They're preparing it for burial, essentially, even though he's already been buried. And so this is kind of like the last thing that they have. Their rabbi has died in a public and humiliating way, And this is the last thing they have as an act of grief, as an act of mourning. And so they go to the tomb to clean his body. And when they get there, they discover that his body is not there. And they naturally assume that the Romans or somebody, some of the Pharisees, some other sect has stolen it. And it's like, it's heartbreaking. Like, it's the last thing they had. And it's gone. And so they go and they tell the disciples, they tell Peter and the others that his body's gone. And so then they all run to the tomb together. And Peter and the other disciples, a handful of them, see that there's no body and they leave. And Mary, I'm such a sap. Mary is left outside of the tomb, not knowing what happened and what's going on here. And that's where we pick up the story. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. She wept. She bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" I'm gonna have to edit this one.
Should I get tissues?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm okay. But
Use
I
your
will.
shirt, not mine.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I promise not to snot on anyone. They said, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she said to them, "They've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they've laid him." When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not recognize that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. All right, I got through it. Now, first of all, just let me acknowledge, I know it's weird, not a lot of people get choked up at that, at my level, to the same degree that I get choked up at. But there's just so much going on in that. So first of all, what stands out to you just about the text we just read at all? Like, what observations do you have? What questions do you have? Let's just start there.
So I'm curious, just because we touched base on it already, and I can't fully wrap my head all the way around that side of it. So Martha was not her sister.
No. So, you're touching on one of the questions I want to talk to you guys about, which is who is Mary? What do you know about Mary Magdalene, or what have you been told about Mary Magdalene? What do you understand?
The only thing I remember is exactly this. Like, she's the one that found him, that was there when he wasn't there at the tomb. That's like the big thing. And I think, was she there at the crucifixion too?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that I remember. But I think that's about it.
Sorry, I have to check my notes because there's a specific thing I want to reference. I want to make sure I get it. It's a history thing, and I want to get it right. Okay. Yes. What have you heard? What's been your experience of how the church represents or talks about Mary Magdalene? What stood out to you? Generic, broad question. That's basically like, say whatever you want now.
Right. Not much, to be fair. I've heard the story of them going to the tomb and he's not there, and then they all freak out, and then they bring him over, and then he comes as the gardener, who I know as the gardener, but they didn't. I guess it didn't explicitly say that. They just thought he was.
Well, Mary's the only one, at least in the Gospel of John.
Right.
Yeah, right.
She was the gardener. But like,
everyone else was gone.
yeah, and then he was like, and that was there have been multiple occurrences of that occurring. That's like the one thing I always notice is like Jesus he sort of plays a different character, if you will.
Yeah, so especially
like,
in the Gospel of John, multiple of Jesus's disciples meet him and don't recognize him after the resurrection.
And then like he says a word, or like he asks a question, and then they immediately recognize
one of the other most important stories is it's the road. Oh gosh, the walk to Emmaus. The road to Emmaus. And Jesus appears to two other disciples, and they don't recognize him until he breaks bread and institutes the Eucharist.
like
And
shares
then they
like,
see,
oh,
and then
God.
they recognize him.
Yeah,
you
they
know?
freak out
So when did Mary recognize Jesus?
after he said Mary,
Yeah,
said her
she
name.
speaks her name, and then she
because the name
knows who
carries
he is.
power.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the observation I always made. Is like he has that ability of. I mean, he's God, so it makes sense. But like, what if we've met Jesus and we didn't know?
Well,
Because of that.
So to talk about that, because that's an important element of the story. So I grew up in a fairly abusive childhood. I carried coping mechanisms with me into adulthood and had a lot to deal with desperation and loneliness and awkwardness and insecurity and a lot of that stuff. Long story short, had a knockdown drag out with God over a season of several months with the help of a spiritual counselor. Really got to work on it because I was just sick of living that way and feeling that way and being that way. The end result, miraculously, God absolutely healed me. I'm not a big miracle, touchy-feely, spiritually kind of guy. I'm pretty pragmatic, but the only way I can describe it is that something outside of me reached inside of me and changed something about me that I could not change myself, and did it for me on my behalf. Like that is exactly what happened. And then I ran into people that I kind of grew up with afterwards. And of course they recognized me because I look the same. But they would say things that were very similar to this. They were like, "What's different?" Like it was very close to, "I don't recognize you." There is something about this, and it's more than a metaphor, but I'll use the word metaphor just because it's the best word I can think of right now. There's something about this metaphor of death and resurrection, of being made new. Jesus' resurrected body is different than his body before his crucifixion. And people don't recognize him. There is such a utter transformation and such an utter power of grace and new life that people don't and of course this is storytelling. This is metaphysical. This is, there's I caution us to not take things too literally in this, but there is truth in this that is deep and spiritual and powerful, and I have experienced it. People have kind of not recognized me after I have been redeemed and healed by a power and a grace that's bigger than me, So I think that's what's at the heart of this. But back to Mary, because I want to stay focused. She's the main character in this particular, discussion. So some of the confusion you said, like Mary of Bethany, another confusion that has been made about Mary Magdalene is the woman caught in adultery. So Mary of Bethany, she's the woman that was the sister of Martha, and she, depending on which gospel you read, cleaned Jesus's feet with her hair, or anointed his head with oil, or there's multiple accounts of this happening, and they all differ. So don't take the Bible too literally, because they don't even agree with themselves. Sorry, that's just that's the aside I always have to make.
It's a lot of different people, like thousands of years ago, trying to compile one book. It's a lot.
Yeah, and there's 4 different gospels for a reason. We're not supposed to take them literally, not all of every part of them literally. Not to say that there's not literal truth in them, but they disagree with each other. So hold loosely to that. So the reason for that, so Mary Magdalene has been confused with a prostitute, an adulterer, Mary of Bethany, and a woman who is not named, who clearly is Mary of Bethany, but she's a woman in sin who begs forgiveness for Jesus. And it's the same anointing story. And she's the one who washes his feet with her tears. And that's Mary. It's obviously Mary of Bethany. So the reason for that is because Pope Gregory the Great in the late 6th century preached a sermon that conflated all of those. He had it wrong, but because he's the Pope. So the Catholic Church has gone on to insinuate that Mary, who is a disciple of Jesus, is actually an adulterous, sinful prostitute who has been kind of lowered in status and power and not considered a disciple in full because the patriarchy. I mean, that's really the reason, because of male dominance.
Well, and how much would she have ever been considered equal anyway, because you're a woman?
Well, and let's be honest, the Gospels were written by a patriarchal society, and so there is a tendency to kind of diminish the role of the female disciples. But there were absolutely female followers of Jesus who were studying at his feet. He was their rabbi, and he was their Messiah, and they followed him and supported him and gave money to his ministry. They were absolutely full-on disciples. And Mary Magdalene is probably the most prominent one. Which leads me to my next point. Thomas Aquinas calls her Apostolum Apostula, which means apostle to the apostles. She's the first one to see the resurrected Christ. And she's the one who goes and insists to the disciples that everything that Jesus had said about dying and coming back to life is true. And they believe it because of her. She is the first apostle. She is the apostle to the apostles, who then go on to spread the gospel to the world. And, we don't hear much about Mary Magdalene after the Gospels. There's nothing in Acts, but she is responsible for the whole idea. You have to remember that Jesus announced ahead of time that he was going to die and resurrect, and nobody bought it. Not even the 12.
Well, I was going to say, so 2 thoughts. Sorry to maybe take us off track a little bit, but they came to me. I can remember.
That's why we do a panel discussion.
That's right.
You're here to take us off track.
Good. I can remember years ago there was a sermon I sat through, and the big point that they made was that the first person that saw was a woman.
Yes.
And that kind
That's
of...
a radical thing for the Gospel of John to proclaim.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, and that part of it was also for just...
None of the dudes got it. They did not understand it. She's the only one who's wait a minute. The empty tomb means, she's the one.
Yeah. Well, and there's some... they touched on how that could be... That was how they kind of felt that Christianity was really true and blue, because why on earth would a woman be who we chose to proclaim?
So this is consistent with almost everything that God does in Scripture. Prefers to use the least expected underdog type of person, the person who society claims cannot be possibly the one that God chooses, and God's like, guess what?
Yeah. Surprise!
Yeah, right. You think you understand women, you think you understand children, you think you understand Samaritans, people of a different ethnic group, you think you understand, and meanwhile God is insisting, you don't understand anything. These are my heroes. These are all my heroes. You think victory comes from defeating Rome? From upending Caesar from the throne? You idiot. Victory comes through the cross. Victory comes through sacrifice and through death and through dying to the things that everyone else thinks are powerful. Victory comes through trusting that God will resurrect and redeem. This is the beautiful message of the gospel.
So where did the disciple men go? Like they came, they saw, and they were like, and then they just pieced out?
Well, they went, and there is some. One of the things about Peter in particular is you have to remember the last time Peter talked to Jesus, Jesus told him he was going to betray him, and Peter insisted he wouldn't.
And then Peter did.
And then he did exactly what Jesus predicted. And then he realized what he had done. And so when Jesus comes back to life, you got to imagine Peter's feeling pretty like, oh, I can't say the word I want to say, but Peter's probably pretty anxious about Jesus coming back to life, and an important next story in the Gospel of John is Peter and Jesus talking to Peter and basically saying like, he asks him the same or the opposite question 3 times. So anyway, that's a whole nother sermon, and it's a beautiful, the Gospel of John is one of the best told stories in the Bible. And I'm talking about, I love the book of Jonah. I love the book of Esther. I love these classic stories, but the Gospel of John is one of the most artistically put together important pieces of literature in the world. It's really worth studying. And that's this is where these stories come from. The guy knows what he's doing with characters and with redemption. The guy understands the grace of God, and he's illustrating it at nearly every point in the story. He's the writer of John, who was not a disciple of Jesus. The writer of John was a Christian as a part of a church that was trying to live out the things that Jesus taught, but they were being passed on. John writes the gospel having never experienced any of this firsthand, but he's writing it in such it's the quote from C.M. Bechtel. It's the fiction is not the absence of truth, but the vehicle for it. And that's what the Gospel of John is. Not to say that everything that happens in the Gospel of John is fictional, because obviously Jesus does die. Jesus does teach. He is a rabbi. Jesus does come back to life. All these things are things that happened, but the way he puts that story together gets to a deeper truth about who Jesus is and what his teachings were. And one of his main points is he chooses the female disciple who's not one of the 12 to be the first apostle. It's on purpose, he knows what he's doing.
Learning so much right now. You have to understand, I've been in the church setting my entire life. I was raised there, and I'm now old and my back hurts, and it's great. I'm learning so
You're
much.
literally the youngest one here.
Yeah. Well, you're not.
Maybe Jonah's younger than you, but not if you count dog years.
Technically younger than me. Yeah, it's whatever. Still, I'm learning so much right now.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I hope you are too.
I was going to just throw in, I feel I don't know about you being from the church, but I know me, the fact that it is Mary, the apostle to the apostles, I don't ever remember that being a major
It's a
point.
Thomas Aquinas quote too. Thomas Aquinas, just so you know, was kind of important when it comes to Christian theology. He was one of the bigs, one of the big names,
But you know what I mean?
That was never a thing, really.
Yeah.
I always just
Mary
confused the
Magdalene
Marys.
Yeah, well, that is. It's
But
a
that's
little
the Pope's fault, so.
It's a little inconvenient that there's 3 really important Marys.
Yeah.
There's Mary of Bethany, there's Mary the mother of Jesus, and then there's Mary Magdalene. And it's it was a common name. It's like John's. There's a lot of important Johns also.
The gospel thing though. I think I did know that he didn't actually see any of it.
Yeah, it was written like a century after everything
I
happened.
think I did know that.
Yeah, it
somebody
was
told me
written
that.
very much later. Mark is about the only gospel that we can have any hope that Mark was actually a follower
present.
of Jesus and saw these things happen. And most of the other gospels seem to base their gospels at least a little bit on his structure too, except for John, and that's because John gets to kind of write. He gets to take all the elements and make them into a cohesive story that tells a better story. That like he's less concerned with history, and he's more concerned with like getting the thing that Jesus was trying to get into people's heads and hearts. John tells his story in such a way to like try and make that effective, you know? He's really trying to get you to like feel the way it feels to hear Jesus talk, you know? And so he's less concerned with the literal truth of things and more concerned with like, what did Jesus actually mean to teach people? And what does it mean that he died and resurrected? And it's kind of a more of a metaphysical gospel. So anyway, we've gone on a little long, so allow me to wrap up. First of all, Barbies in the Bible, the whole point is you think the Bible is patriarchal and misogynistic. It's not. Almost every important story includes some kind of like a feminist idea to it. It's throughout the whole text. And that goes all the way back to, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago. And it certainly comes all the way to the Gospels. Jesus was a teacher and a rabbi to women who were there at his crucifixion and were there at his resurrection. Women are not only included, but integral to the gospel truth that we understand today. And then second, the metaphor / spiritual reality of death and resurrection. That people can be transformed not through overcoming by their own power, but through surrendering to a grace that is beyond them. And that's what we see illustrated in the story of Mary witnessing Jesus' resurrection. She doesn't recognize him, but when he says her name, she's like, there you are, and she's changed forever. It's a thing that changed the world.
Yeah.
And she was the one who brought that message to the ones who were supposed to already know it. You know, like she was the teacher to the apostles. Like, hey, remember when Jesus said all this stuff? It turns out he wasn't just fooling around. He was telling the truth. And like we do not have the church without her. We do not have redemption and the story of the gospel without her. She's a vital, crucial, important part. And she was not a prostitute. She was not a woman of ill repute. She was not all of these things are just attempts to defame her character. She was a follower of Jesus who believed wholeheartedly and was the first to believe in the first human to believe in the resurrection. And now here we all are. So, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.